Good morning and welcome everyone who's joining us today. Welcome to this webinar that we're hosting. We're talking about building for the future, a spotlight on sustainability in UK house building. My name is Laura Drury and I work on the sustainability communications team here at One Click LCA. It's my pleasure today to be hosting this session alongside this brilliant lineup of speakers. So I will let them introduce themselves in just a moment. Before I do that, for those of you who are not familiar with One Click LCA, we're the market-leading sustainability platform for decarbonising projects and products across the built environment, with the mission to power the makers of a zero carbon future. You can learn more about who we are and the work we do, and also who we work with at oneclicklca.com. So in today's session, I'm going to be asking some big questions to our panel and really dig into the topic of embodied carbon in house building and how developers can move towards a more sustainable future. We're then going to take a look at a real life case study from UK and Ireland developer Ballymore, and then we'll go straight into our live Q&A. So if you do have questions that pop up at any point during the session, feel free to pop those in the questions or the chat panel that you should see on your screen there, and we'll get to as many of those as possible later on. So let me hand over to our speakers. I hope you can hear me, Charlie. Charlie has just joined us live from a delayed flight, so hopefully he's here. Possibly not. Okay, we'll come back to him. So let's start with you, Alejandro.
Hey, morning, Laura. Thanks for having me today. So my name is Ale. I work for BREEAM at BRE. BREEAM is the leading sustainability certification in the UK and internationally, and I work as the principal consultant for resources and embodied carbon, which effectively means that I develop all the science that goes into the manuals around LCA, embodied carbon, circular economy, and those kind of things. So I've been doing that for about 3 years now, and prior to that, I was already at BRE doing research for the Construction Innovation Hub, and prior to that, I was at UCL doing research around LCA. So it's been so far, my entire career has been all about carbon emissions and LCA and those kind of stuff. So I'm very pleased to be here today.
Amazing, thank you. And Andrew, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. Delighted to be here today. My name is Andrew Cowan. I am the team leader for the UK Business Development team. I joined back in June, but my background really has been around housing sustainability. So I worked for the NHBC for a number of years prior to joining BRE. So I spent a number of years also with the BRE, and then I've moved on and I'm now at One Click LCA.
Amazing, thank you. So I think we'll wait for Charlie to pop up, but in the meantime, let's get straight into the discussion. So I'm going to start by asking all of you the big question, which is, why are we talking about this today? How is the industry changing to make embodied carbon a focus right now? And I will start with you, Andrew.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I mean, it is the big question, isn't it, right at the very start? So I guess whether we believe government's going to be able to build these ambitious targets or not over the coming years, I think the fact remains that we need to do something for this number of homes that they are going to build and keep building for a sustainable and fit for purpose future. And I think the housing sector is evolving. I've seen it even over the last few years post-COVID, and it's really started to focus on addressing embodied carbon by focusing on things like sustainable building practices, material efficiency and circular economy principles. So if you think about things like materials, we're seeing at One Click, we're seeing an increasing number of low embodied carbon products on the market. So there's recycled steel, sustainably sourced timber, low carbon concrete, another example. And then of course, we're seeing EPDs becoming more prevalent across not only housing developments, but also across commercial buildings. MMC is another one as well. So prefab and modular constructions being used more and more. And despite some of the failures that are out there in the market at the moment, this is becoming more widely used, whether it's bathroom pods or whatever's being used in flats at the moment. Of course, life cycle assessments are being integrated into design and construction phases. And then, as I mentioned, circular economy is more recognised, which is emphasising really the reuse and recycling of materials. And I think we've actually come a long way, but we still need to do a lot more.
And Ali, let's pass over to you, and then we'll go to Charlie and he can introduce himself before he answers.
Yeah, great. Thanks. Just to add to what Andrew just said, I think what we've seen definitely in the last 5 to 6 years is we've seen a shift in the industry from that strong focus on operational carbon towards embodied emissions. I think there's a better understanding in the industry about the importance of embodied carbon and how much of it is actually part of the total emissions when we construct buildings. Obviously, as a consequence of that, we're also seeing an increment in people uptaking LCA. We've certainly seen it within BREEAM over the last, let's say, since 2018, when we originally released some of the credits around Material 01, and everyone in the industry seemed a little bit surprised. And I would say we're probably a little bit ahead of the curve at the time, but that's definitely changed now. Perhaps the commercial sector is a little bit ahead than the housing sector, and this is partly part of the reason why we're here today to address LCA specifically in the housing sector. But yeah, and then obviously to add to that, there is more policy and more regulation around embodied carbon that needs to be addressed. That's always important. There are stricter targets, and yeah, we're here to push the industry in that direction and try and facilitate that process for the housing sector.
Amazing, thank you. I'll pass back to you, Charlie. Welcome back. If you don't mind just introducing yourself to the audience, and then we're starting with the big question: why are we here talking about this today?
Apologies everyone for the delay. My name is Charlie Conlon. I'm working for Ballymore Homes, working all things sustainability for the group. It's straddled between the UK and Ireland. Ballymore, large infrastructure right the way down to small housing. We're developers that kind of done regeneration projects throughout Europe. I unfortunately missed the question just before I got onto a bit better Wi-Fi here, so I think I'm set here for the rest of the call, but may have another crack at the question.
Yeah, sure.
I heard so
we're asking why are we talking about this today, and how is the industry changing to make embodied carbon such a focus now?
So I'm sure Alejandro probably touched on it, but the industry has actually been working on carbon emissions for a long time. I suppose the focus originally would have been anything to improve the energy, because that would have made the product sell better, because less energy, less selling, or better selling. But we've done so much in that space that we've squeezed that amount of carbon so low that the embodied carbon has taken up so much more of a wedge in that pie. So I think it's only natural that we kind of transition into that embodied carbon. I think today specifically, as good a time as any, but we have tools, and the industry's evolved enough that we can actually tackle this with a bit of rigor behind it, and really make it a bit of an impact in the design stage, the procurement stage. So yeah.
Brilliant, thank you, and
no problem.
Thanks for joining us in a very difficult scenario, it looks like there.
Quite all right.
So I'm going to move on to the next question, and again I'm going to ask all of you this, but I'll start with you, Charlie. What specific advantages does LCA and lifecycle assessment provide to developers, and how can they leverage this data for competitive advantage?
So couple of different prongs, I'd say. There's internal benefits and then there's external benefits. The external benefits would be something like a sustainability certification, gathering points in that certification, or complying with the legislation in a certain municipality. But internally, which is what I'm more focused on, is understanding where the hotspots are in the buildings and understanding where we can kind of get a bit of opportunity to reduce the carbon footprint. Now, to do that, you need to build up a bit of a knowledge base around topologies. So we can map a house a couple of times, we get a good understanding of where the hotspots are in the house, and then we can target those hotspots in the house. That would be the same for an apartment in any type of construction or any topology in general.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
No
Alejandro,
problem.
from BRE's perspective.
Yes. So to add to what Charlie just said, I guess the main thing from a BRE perspective is aligning with some of the criteria and the targets that we set in the certification schemes, you know. So there is a strong focus nowadays on embodied carbon, and we have updated our benchmarking credits as well to reflect current practices. So yeah, so from an ESG perspective, there's a lot of value for developers to do embodied carbon and LCA analysis for sure. There's also more sort of externally, you could say that there are benefits to demonstrating leadership, which I always think is crucial in the world of sustainability. There's obviously brand reputation and things like that. And then from a design perspective, just what Charlie was saying just now, it's obviously the best way to try and decide or make decisions around materials and design. So yeah, that's it.
Great, thank you. And then the third and final perspective, I guess, from a LCA solution provider, Andrew.
Yeah, I think to complement Charlie and Ali and what they say, really, there's several advantages for developers that we see from our customers, and they're able to improve their environmental performance and reduce their costs. And if you think about cost savings, LCAs highlight areas where things like materials or energy can be optimized, and you can obviously see some cost savings in construction operation from that. And if you're selecting these materials with lower embodied carbon, for example, they can mean lower life cycle costs over the lifetime of the building, and these materials could also be more durable or energy efficient as part of that.
Great, thank you all. And I'm going to come back to you, Ali, with this next question, specifically to get the point of view from BRE. How does BRE support house builders in incorporating sustainability into their projects, and what resources are most helpful? Yeah,
thanks, Laura. So that's a great question. So I would say the main thing that from a BRE perspective in regards to helping the industry, especially the housing sector around sustainability, would be our certification schemes. So within BREEAM, we have a residential scheme in the UK called Home Quality Mark. We call it HQM. So that's there to guide developers towards sustainability practices. Actually, one of the things that we've been working quite heavily over the last few months is aligning HQM with the rest of our BREEAM schemes. So specifically what I've done there is aligning the criteria to what's already been done within the new construction schemes in the UK. So that should help mitigate some of the difficulties that we had with the HQM scheme. So that's there for the residential sector. We also publish all kinds of resources like guidance documents. We provide workshops. We've got some workshops coming up in circularity, which is very close to embodied carbon. We have the BRE Academy as well, which recently launched a net zero carbon course, and we're now preparing a circular economy course. So yeah, there's all kinds of tools and resources that BRE provides to the housing sector that helps hopefully educate and facilitate the processes around embodied carbon.
Brilliant, thank you. And everyone, do go and check out those resources. So then moving on, another question to all of you, and I'm going to start with you, Charlie. So talking about regulations that focus on sustainability. So with upcoming regulations focusing more on this, what key legislative changes should developers be preparing for and aware of?
I think across the board, there's going to be far more focus on embodied carbon wherever you lie in the world. So understanding what will get you past all of those regulatory bodies is probably the best practice. And for me, operating in a couple of different countries, the main thing is that we are doing these LCA footprints of the buildings with enough rigor that everyone's going to be happy with them. So that is using the best available data, whether that's spend data or data from a BIM model or some other kind of data set, and we're going through and assigning those materials. Once we have that done and we can kind of verify that it's within a degree of accuracy that we're happy with, we're pretty confident that it's going to pass through all the legislation pieces that are needed, whether they're going to include the full scope of a project or segment parts of a scope of a project. That's really up to that local municipality. So what I do is very much trying to make sure we'll always get through the ring, but in any scenario in Ireland and the UK going forward, you will need to have these life cycle assessments done. And this will be the same, whether it's for direct legislation or for a local municipality. They're kind of viewed as similar kind of hurdles in the business. And this is just kind of make sure that you're clear and across the board for embodied carbon today. At some stage, we're going to get to a point where we're going to have targets that we're going to have to hit. And without this kind of background knowledge, it's going to be very hard to hit those targets as well. So there's kind of a today, what we're doing on the ground, kind of a looking forward to the future. And like we said earlier, if we're finding hotspots and we need to reduce them, we want to make sure we're doing them as cost effectively as possible. So there's kind of a two-pronged part here, but making sure that you have the LSA footprints done will kind of ensure that you're ready for those legislation changes.
Andrew, I'd love to get your input there as well.
Yeah, I think if I think back to throughout my career really, and thinking about house building, there's always regulation changes coming. There's always something that people have got to prepare for, and I guess developers need to really prepare for regulation, as Charlie said, around the embodied carbon of buildings, energy efficiency, biodiversity, of course, renewable energy. These are all things that are part of a wider sustainable UK and Ireland goals. And then I guess what Charlie was saying a moment ago is interesting, because my point here is that if you stay ahead of these changes, you adopt sustainable materials, improve energy efficiency, and you prioritize things like biodiversity and renewable energy, then of course developers are going to be able to ensure that they're meeting the compliance and regulations and the market demands that are out there as well, and hopefully gain that competitive advantage.
Great, thank you. And Ali?
Hi, yeah, thank you. Sorry, just to add to what's been discussed in terms of regulation, perhaps worth highlighting that, because I work internationally as well through Brigham, and one of the things I've noticed is that the UK often trails a little bit behind when we talk about embodied carbon and net zero policy. And what I mean by that is, if you think of countries like France or some of the Scandinavian countries, all of them have policy in place that means that you effectively have to do LCAs as part of the construction industry, and that often is not the case here. I think a lot of it is private industry led, and some really good examples of what's been going on over the last year or so is we've had the UK net zero carbon building standard released in the last couple of months. I know they're in conversations with government to see how the government can sort of utilize that document. We've also been working very hard on the development of the built environment carbon database. So that's the first carbon database for buildings in the UK that will collect all of that information. We've obviously had the RICS whole life carbon version 2, which is the unofficial way of doing whole life carbon in the UK. And so it's been amazing to actually see the industry come together and actually pull all of these documents and release them for everyone to use. So, and definitely the housing sector can take a part on those conversations, and all of that guidance is there for everyone to use, basically. And it's a great way of actually meeting all those targets that we were talking about.
Great, thank you. I'll stick with you, Ali, for this next question. Can you discuss some of the examples of innovative building materials or practices that are actually reducing embodied carbon in the new housing projects?
Sure. Yeah. So one of the ways, materials wise, within BREEAM specifically, we try and sort of steer people towards using low carbon materials, such as, there's concrete alternatives there, recycled steel, timber frame construction. Those kind of are like sort of the obvious hotspots around the superstructure of a building, and you can definitely get better credits in certification schemes like BREEAM if you go in that direction. There's also stuff like prefab and modular building techniques, which are in the housing sector. We used to work a little bit around this in the Construction Innovation Hub, and we had some demo projects that really showcased the benefits of modular construction within the housing sector. There's installation materials, which can use renewable sources and things like that. In terms of practices, one of the things that we've been working on at BRE for a while now is something that we call the circularity principles, which is not necessarily embodied carbon specific, but it'll definitely put you in a pathway to better carbon performance. And what I'm talking about here is, trying to think about how we design for circularity within the built environment, how we enable circularity, and that also has to do with obviously how we procure building materials, the way that we procure those materials. Trying to think of waste as a resource and not as waste. How do we empower when we design buildings? How do we empower for material recovery and for reuse? All those kind of things. There's loads and lots of guidance out there from the BRE, from the UKGBC, from other partners on circularity and embodied carbon that's available for people to sort of ingrain those design principles into their construction.
Amazing, thank you. Charlie, I'd love to come to you with the same question. I know we're going to dig into the Ballymore story a bit later on, but just briefly.
Yeah, I think, like Ali said, it kind of spans across a lot of different disciplines within a built environment, from your design team optimizing structures, making sure you've got your spanning right and your car park layout right to make sure that you're not over engineering anything. Then you're down to your procurement team, making sure, I suppose in the design phase as well, any type of BIM technology to help clash detections and make sure that you're not going to be removing material on site that you've paid for is now waste. And then you go into your procurement, which is all really looking at your concrete mixes, your steel fabrication blends, whether they're all recycled or half blend recycle, and down to your carpet tiles or your paints. Like it really is, every material has an opportunity to kind of have a better solution, but understanding where they are and how much impact they have and trying to play and push and pull with that. And then right down to the people on the ground, the boots on the ground, wastage on site, how you deal with your waste. All of this kind of tracks back into your embodied carbon calculation. So I think there's many different areas of opportunity, and that's not really speaking very specifically about any innovative materials or solutions, which there are many and kind of evolving every day. So I think keeping an eye on what's evolving, what's market ready, and then kind of dealing with what you have on the ground today. Between the two of them, there is definitely lots of opportunity to reduce your carbon.
Brilliant, thank you. So let's go a bit deeper into the technology that's enabling some of this. So I'll start with you, Andrew. What role does technology such as digital LCA tools and BIM play in managing and reducing a building's carbon footprint?
Yeah, I mean, they're indispensable, really, in my opinion. If you're looking at managing, reducing the building's carbon footprint, and especially you can connect them together, and that really enables precise carbon tracking, and you can really optimize the material use and the support of the sustainable design choices, and you can really streamline compliance through that way. And then if you leverage those tools, I guess developers like Charlie and their project teams, they can really reduce that embodied operational carbon, improve the efficiency, and just, again, hopefully gain a competitive edge in a market that's starting to get increasingly focused on sustainability.
Great. So nice segue over to Charlie there.
Yeah, all of these tools are going to be helpful. Like, it's a big challenge, this topic. It's not an easy one fix solution. So really leaning on any tools available to understand how we can get the best data and use the design to optimize things rather than just to be another layer of complexity added to a project that's not needed. The BIM tools, I'm working closely with the BIM team, and in fairness, there's a lot of useful cases in the BIM that are going to save money, save time, save coordination issues, but also save materials that wouldn't have to be there. And I think anytime that's a win, it's an overlapping win with costs. That's an easy sell for me. We're trying to sell all of these sustainability materials. If there's something that's going to save us money in the meantime, that's a real win. So really hunting down those solutions that are doubling up on our objectives as a company to make sure that we're profitable and clean in the design and replicatable and sustainable. And I think any tools that are going to help you like that. BIM, there's a lot of new AI softwares that I've seen that are coming onto the market for optimizing runs and lengths. There's a lot of use cases for procurement where you try and figure out they're almost like dating sites for procurement teams, that you have all your materials hosted, you'd understand the cost, their carbon impact, where they're coming from, and you can kind of filter out a bit more cleanly rather than the old school 5 names on a napkin who you're ringing around to get prices off. All of these optimization tools are going to help kind of focus the efforts, and if we can steer this for the sustainability objective, they're only going to benefit. This is our big thing that we're working on here. So I think using any tools is going to be helpful, especially if there's overlapping objectives within those tools. But I think BIM is definitely one that's I'm getting the data out of, I'm getting savings out of, I'm getting clash detection out of. I think it's definitely an easy first choice tool that I think is going to help the industry in a big way.
Great answer, thank you. And Ali, I'd like to pass that one over to you as well.
Yeah, just to add what everything that they've been sort of saying, I guess from our perspective or from the sort of work that I do, one of the key things that we're trying to work on is with the LCA tools is in transparency and efficiency, which is definitely something that LCA tools can add in sort of enabling that sort of mindset. Also the tracking and the simulation of embodied carbon, those kind of things. From my perspective, in terms of pure technology, I guess what we're trying to do is trying to facilitate that there's a seamless process between certification bodies, the tools that we release, and the LCA tools. That way, when people sort of are working within one piece of technology, they can sort of seamlessly move in between. But effectively, we're just trying to facilitate the process.
Great, thank you. I'm going to ask a couple more questions, and then I'll pass over to Charlie to take us through a bit more information about what Ballymore is doing in this, with regards to this topic. So, question for you, Charlie. In your experience, what are some common challenges that developers are facing when they're trying to lower their embodied carbon, and how can these be overcome? Big question.
Good question. Yeah, I think it depends on where you're at on the journey. It's the real answer. If you're trying to hit a target today and you don't know where your benchmark or baseline is, that's a really hard scenario where you're saying, okay, well, we want to hit this target of X kg per meter squared, but we've never mapped a topology of this type before. We're going to kind of weigh in on industry to figure out what a benchline might look like. And then we're kind of working backwards to get to something. But we haven't taken into account our suppliers, our supply chain, our construction methods. So there's a gap there, and that can be quite a frustrating gap where we're kind of aiming at a target, we're not standing on the ground. I think that is something that we're trying to avoid by doing these LCA footprints, so that we can kind of get a better understanding of where we are and what's actually achievable and what the cost gap would be to get really high target. And then outside of that, that's kind of all like targets and ambition and goal setting. When you're actually on the ground and trying to get a material approved or get a technology approved, I think there's a real gap in the industry to be able to get something from a backyard study to a building holding up 40 apartments. There's a long line of competency that needs to be kind of rigorously tested. It's an expensive journey. It takes time to kind of build up that trust within the industry. That can also be quite a long challenge. I get a lot of people contacting me saying we have a technology, it's ready to use, we haven't used it yet, and we need someone to help use it. And that getting that from into the ground from that conversation can take a couple of years. In reality, that if we were making widgets, it would be easy to rapidly prototype, but these prototypes that we're building, they're quite expensive. So I think those are the two pieces that I find a big challenge. Outside of that, I'd say within our supply chain industry and our subcontractors and their subcontractors, there's a level of scale where a competency comes with this. They have the vocabulary of embodied carbon. They know what we're talking about. They know how this works. They know what they're needing to deliver as far as EPDs and information. And then there's kind of smaller subcontractors that aren't really at that space yet, and trying to bring them along the journey, that can be quite a challenge, just to try and help aid them go back to their supply chain and figure out where their materials are coming from and really get to the bottom of kind of putting the pieces that are in the building into the one-click software. That can be a tricky scenario unless you're working with kind of bigger outfits. So I'd say there are 3 prongs, a little all over the place, but 3-prong problems. Yeah.
Oh, that's great, thank you. And Ali, from your perspective, do those challenges resonate? Are you seeing similar, different?
No, yeah, 100%. Yeah, I would say my experience in the conversations I've had with some of our customers definitely align with what Charlie just explained. I would say the main thing is probably that difference between the smaller developers and sort of the bigger ones. Often what I see or what I experience in that regard is a lack of expertise and resources around LCA with the smaller developers. So what we try and do really is just like Charlie said, is try and bring those smaller developers along with us in that journey and that sustainability journey. It's LCA comes at a cost, and yeah, it's just about trying and bringing that cost down for those who want to engage in the journey but perhaps don't have the budget for it. So yeah, we emphasize that a lot within BREEAM.
Great, thank you. I'm going to finish up this kind of section of the session with a question for you, Andrew, just to kind of bookend it. So taking all of this into consideration, how is OneClick supporting this particular industry in understanding and reducing the embodied carbon in their projects?
Yeah, sure. I'll give you a quick answer because actually Charlie's, I think there's nothing better than hearing a real life use case. But from our point of view, OneClick supports the industry by making it easier to measure, understand and reduce carbon across building projects. So by automating the LCA processes and integrating with BIM, providing comprehensive material database, supporting green certification like BREEAM, and enabling things like scenario analysis, that all really empowers project teams to make informed and sustainable decisions. So our role in benchmarking and training as well, along with the regulatory compliance, that really further enhances the value that we offer. So that will then help the construction industry to move towards a lower carbon future. And also we've launched our embodied carbon playbook for house builders, and that really serves as a comprehensive guide to reducing carbon in residential construction. So for house builders, there are tips around using practical tools and the strategies, and there's case studies in there as well. So hopefully that'll help them to make some informed decisions and achieve compliance, etc. I'm sure at the end of this we'll be making that available to anyone that wants to read it. But by following that playbook's guidance, house builders and contractors as well, I guess, can not only just contribute to lowering the carbon in the built environment, but it's that competitive advantage that I keep banging the drum about. But I think it actually does. If you're ahead of the game, you'll find it easier to move into that sort of area.
Great, thank you. I have actually just dropped the link to that guide into the chat. If anyone wants to have a look at that, feel free to. And so I'm going to pass over to you now, Charlie. Feel free to take the reins and take us through this real life use case, if you like, with Ballymore and the work that you're doing there?
Super. So yeah, just a little project, an example of kind of how this would kind of fall together. It's a residential project in Ireland's 435 apartments, kind of split at 1 beds, 2 beds. Just to go through some of the kind of things that stood out for this project specifically, how we did use one click, and then some kind of easy wins in the embodied carbon side at the end. So the project actually had a fantastic BIM process throughout the project. We had our full architectural, full structure, full M&E, full landscape models, and we had a full rebars model for any of the poured elements. Most of the fabrication was precast concrete with a couple of podium pours and a couple of base pours as well. There was prefabricated pods, balconies, and the rebar and the concrete, obviously. So trying to get all of those consultants to make sure the BIM coordination was correct was one of the key parts of the project, and was very successful on the project, thankfully. The prefabricated cages, this was a huge saving in our steel wastage on site. There was no wastage on site. These were dropped into place. They're all plug and play kind of cages designed up with Midland Steel. Shout out to them. And they're kind of all assembled ready for the pouring on the day. These were a quick look at the pods. Shout out to B-Pod. So these were already put together, clicked, put into place when we got them on the day. And these are the B-Pod assemblies just to see how they were laid out. A little bit on the precast. This is the frame of the building, and then the balconies. But I suppose this is kind of more what we're looking for. The embodied carbon process. If there was elements in the BIM that were of significance, like any high impact materials or high volume materials, we would have that from the architectural model, and we can pull that data directly into one click. This was super useful because trying to tally up all the pours and all of the amount of concrete that came to the site would be a challenge, but we have it already on this platform that we're working with in Revit, and we can pull it directly into one click. That was a huge saver for us. Everything else is going to go from a BOQ, bill of quantities of some sort, into one click. There's a bit of a war going on to get the QSs involved in this embodied carbon discussion and works, but I think this is going to be a function or a kind of consideration of the QS team or the quantity surveyors in general, just to make sure that if we are formatting a BOQ, that we've got it organized in a way that we can drag it, drop it straight into one click again. So this would made the one click process extremely useful, and it's nice there is plugins for straight Excel and from the Revit. So all of the information that we could take from the architecture model straight in, everything else straight in from the BOQ, and then we had this sense checked or verified with Carbon Trust at the time, which was great. So a little bit of a breakdown of our materials. This is what you would get from doing a one-click LCA. You get like a benchmarking score based off of the topology that you chose, where your emissions are in the A1 to A4 category and the other categories, but our main objective was A1 to A3. And then you have kind of all the other elements of the building kind of component breakdown and where they sit as far as their impact. So really good high level look at what we're looking at in the building and where we can kind of start to pull into to interrogate for more kind of savings within the carbon or the design. So a couple of little different initiatives that the site had going for it. We had power to the site early doors, so there was a lot less fuel consumption used from generators. So this was for use of the cranes and for all other kind of generator equipment. So that was a huge saving in liquid fuel, which is embodied carbon, or it is embodied carbon in this scenario because it's work-related carbon. The procurement, heavy recycled steel from Midlands, I think it was 98% recycled steel. So that was something that we got in there early doors and really worked out with them. And then a lean design approach. Again, this is kind of making savings for everyone. So if we can do this, we should. The original scheme had a second basement that was actually removed as a byproduct. If we're looking at the original design to where it ended up, that was a massive save, and more than any other objective combined. That was kind of out of our hands, but it's a nice scenario and just to highlight an opportunity and how that works. And then we had a first use of a new concrete material called Carbon Cure. So it's injected carbon into a carbon or concrete mix. And this reduces the carbon or cementitious material in the cement by 3%. So we use this on all the screed on all of the buildings. So very small scenario, but it was first time getting used. So again, that road to competency, this was one of those first steps for that, and it was quite a good one for the project. So that was a partnership with Kilsaran. Big shout out to them as well. And then this is kind of look at the BIM clash detection. These are more of the objectives, I suppose. So if you see here, all of these dots on the screen, they're all concrete that we removed from the building before it got to site to allow services to punch through. If we didn't do that with the BIM process, these all would have been in site and we would have cored them out with a coring rig. And that would have all just gone into waste. So we would have paid for the coring rig, and we would have paid for them to go off the waste, and we would have paid for their embodied carbon. So 96 tons removed on 432 apartments doesn't seem like a lot, but in fairness, this is a real winning scenario for me. Saving, clash detection, and it's embodied carbon. So I think this kind of work is something that we're going to definitely prioritize for any kind of coordination in the future in larger buildings. Another one that we looked at, and I have a little snip here from the LCA or from One Click, just sense checking all of these things as we go. On the right, there's two photos of a normal stairwell getting out with light gauge steel, and then 2 layers of plasterboard on that because it's a fire corridor as a stairs. And then on the left is what the option that we actually ended up going with. So we stripped it out, just concrete walls. Again, a very easy win, didn't impact the design heavily, and we had another significant saving in the carbon across the whole estate. So I think this is real lean design activity, and this is what we want to bring into kind of every area of the buildings. If we can reduce or remove material, we should prioritize doing that, because we shouldn't pay for it if we don't need it. And not to get hung up on plaster, but I think there's a real opportunity for this kind of work throughout the building. It definitely should be looked at. Yeah, I think that's the meat and potatoes of it. But yeah, just a little overview of kind of a few little objectives and things that you can kind of target in a project, and kind of high level look at how a project went for us.
Amazing, thank you. That's a lot of detail to cover in a very short space of time, so well done. So Charlie's just been talking there, obviously, about the role of One Click in his work. So just quickly before we move on to the Q&A, you will see a poll pop up on your screen just in a moment. If you would like to book some time with Andrew and his team to talk more about your projects and how we could possibly help, then please do go ahead and choose the option yes on there, and we'll be in touch with you very shortly. And so moving on to our Q&A. So we've got some questions that have come in via the chat. So I'll go back to the start. So Purvesh asked early on, and I'll let you, the three of you, decide who wants to jump in and answer. But his question is, the UK housing sector is significantly behind in the incorporation and consideration of LCAs, and local governments are limited in their resources and understanding of how they can develop a stronger brief and an understanding of embodied carbon. How can local governments ensure that they're able to empower their understanding and their projects to be low carbon, especially since their contractors are not fully aware of the dynamic landscape? Big question.
I'm quite happy to start if the rest of the panel doesn't mind. I completely agree with the initial statement on that question. Obviously, in BREEAM, we work with the commercial and the housing sector quite tightly, and you can definitely, as you know, as the person who looks after LCAs and embodied carbon, I can definitely see a difference in resources and knowledge around the housing sector. So I think that the key thing would be to provide better and more guidance. And I can point people out to, for those who don't know, to something called the Future Homes Hub. So BRE, among many other organizations in the sector, have been part of the Future Homes Hub for the past few years, and it's a great source of information, guidance. There's lots of reports in there specifically for the housing sector and developers on how to do whole life carbon. We've ensured that a lot of the stuff that's in there is simple and not necessarily like really long technical documents. In addition to that, I would say it's important that we work with local governments because they are the ones that effectively need to often understand what it is that is required. BREEAM is mandated in some local authorities across the UK, and obviously there is a lot of guidance within BREEAM around LCA and whole life carbon. I would say it's then up to the local authority often to lead on this. So a good example of that is in London, the GLA has whole life carbon guidance and policy within their planning requirements, which I kind of always say that once things are in policy, things tend to move a lot faster because people just are then suddenly forced to catch up with it. And in the commercial sector, that's effectively what we've seen. And perhaps we haven't seen that quick movement in the housing sector because the housing sector is often more built up of smaller companies. So I'll let someone else add on to that if they want to.
Yeah, I'll just jump in quickly. I agree obviously with what Ali says. Some sort of guidance is important, but also I think the investors and the big funds out there, etc., that have the major sustainability goals need to start to help to drive this as well by helping local government understand what they're trying to achieve with their own sustainability plans, and I think that can also support that. So yeah, I think it's a two-pronged attack really on that front. So education from the people that want to build the buildings in the first place, sticking to their guns, and also the local governments as well, actually learning, being open to suggestions, and then trying to support people through the planning process. Oh, we can't hear you, Charlie.
Sorry. Knocked over with the little mute on the elbow here. Yeah, I think all of that's correct. If I was to add to it a little bit, I think the local municipalities have a lot of buildings going on in their boroughs. It's definitely a part of their task right now is to gather that information and start getting one click or any kind of LCA footprints done for any type of topology, and then start to form their own targets and baselining. Because if you're in a scenario where you have a local vernacular picking the brick and picking the window, you're going to have different embodied carbon targets than another borough that doesn't have that same vernacular. So I think understanding that this is going to be something going forward, you can kind of barter with whoever the developer is to make sure that they're going to give you this information by the end of it. You collate enough of them of the similar topology, and you can start to kind of string together, okay, this is what our area's carbon footprint looks like per square meter, and this is going to be the acceptable range in that area. There's definitely a bit of learning to be done, and there's piecing this all together. And I think, like Ali said, there is a lot of tools available from BREEAM or from BRE and others, and the GLA was mentioned. They've a lot of different information out there, open source, and this isn't the first time we're doing this. This is not actually that new. This is happening around the world, all over the place. So I think the task is to find out who the experts are and really to distill the information down into something that means something to you in your area, and then use that to set targets and kind of get the ball rolling. Outside of that, it would definitely be, as Andrew said, kind of follow the money, find a bank or find any kind of finance that's going to kind of use this as a vehicle and lean on that heavily. They're the two options to make this thing move fast. So I'd say either or, but pick a road and kind of hammer everyone until they're in line.
Thanks, Charlie. And let's stick with you as well for this next question. So Mark has asked another big question, so bear with. Does the panel believe there is a viable route to the industry operating within its total sectoral carbon budget as defined by the government's legally binding national carbon budget if it does not swiftly embrace the targets set out within the recent net zero carbon building standard for each and every new home going forwards?
These honest answers only. I would say it's going to be tricky. There's a lot of things that have to happen to get to there. That it's not just about setting targets. It's about bringing all these supply chains up to where they need to go, bringing all these factories, energy consumption down, getting the clean energy on the grid. There's a lot of different moving pieces to make a brick from a certain kg footprint to zero carbon. It might not necessarily be the same material by the end of that journey. There's a lot of milestones that are easy to achieve right now because we actually haven't done a lot of work in this area. So it's similar to how we dropped the energy prices or energy consumption by huge steps and then small increments. There's huge steps to be hit here within superstructure, building topology, how we design the buildings, what we remove, what we accept. There's got to be a big push for certification and new materials and kind of help for all of these product makers and manufacturers to kind of put funding into these new materials and new sourcing. So we don't need this one shot kills all. This is death by 1,000 cuts. So I think, yeah, I'd be concerned that we're not putting the resources or the effort in as needed. But I would say the high achievers are, and those high achievers are going to get access to the greenest capital and the kind of prowess of being at the market edge. So I think there's going to be a private pull through the door, and then there'll be a lot to follow after that. But whether everyone as a whole is going to be doing this by our target date, I'd be concerned about that. That'd be my honest 2 cents.
I think, Mark, it's a really good question. I'm not sure I'm fully equipped to answer it, but I moderated another panel about a month ago, and on the panel were people from major real estate developers, asset owners. There's a pension fund there as well, and the new net zero carbon standard had just been launched, and there was a lot of excitement about it, but also some trepidation from the panel. So people were discussing that they felt that it was actually quite hard to achieve, and I think that backs up what Charlie's just said a moment ago. There needs to be some major change. But from that panel and the people in that audience, there was 200 plus people in there that day. The general feel was that people were excited about it. Whether they were blindly excited or not, it's another thing, but it's going to be tough. But initially, I think people are on board with it. I'm not sure if I've answered your question there or not.
Yeah, I would like just to add very quickly to that, because I didn't directly work on establishing some of those limits, but I do work with people that did, and they were developed in line with the UK sector budget. They use the top-down approach. So effectively, if you don't follow those targets, you will miss the 2050 target, put bluntly. But I think if we were to separate, because the UK Net Zero Carbon Building Standard did have separate limits for operational carbon and embodied carbon. So I think there's definitely a lot more confidence in how to achieve the operational side of things than which goes back to the first thing we said at the beginning of the webinar. So yeah, one thing is to have the limits, another thing is to achieve those limits. I think, just like Charlie was saying, we need to bring the industry with us. And it's a lot of really small steps for people to actually be able to achieve. Especially my concern would be with the upfront carbon targets, because there's a lot of work that needs to happen around that before people actually start meeting those targets, which will be hard to meet.
Great, thank you all. I think we've got maybe time just to finish up with one more question. So Hayley had a question. How can waste management companies best support commercial house builders in LCAs to improve project sustainability? Maybe Charlie?
Yeah, that's great to hear that question. I am working with a lot of different waste contractors. I think the main objective for me is to make sure that the waste can be used for a recycled scenario, and understanding where that scenario is, not just incinerator. So if we can reduce the amount of waste that goes to landfill or incinerator, we can benefit from that in our embodied carbon in the building. So segregation of the waste, clean dispatch of the waste, maybe one step of processing on site. We looked at a lot of different scenarios where maybe we would have a pallet shredder. We had a load of pallets coming to the site, and the site's getting clunked up with all these pallets, and then there's all these timber removals, and then the trucks are coming in and out to do this. There was scenarios where maybe the waste contractor would buy a pallet machine, shredding machine, put it on a lorry and drive it around site to site and shred it. So then there's less deliveries and collections. There's small things, and that's for one material. There's over 50 materials in every building. There's little scenarios for every material that we can kind of reduce our waste. I'd say making sure that if we're lifting anything, that it's packed as tightly as possible. That will reduce the amount of air that we're delivering and transporting, which will reduce the amount of fuel usage. And then a real clear understanding of where these materials are going to the end of the life. I'd imagine waste contractors are going to end up becoming new raw material suppliers, and really understanding how that looks and where that will fall within your own business. I think that'll kind of put you ahead and get you in great stead for this.
Amazing, thank you. Andrew and Ale, did you want to jump in on that one just before we move on and finish up?
Just to really reiterate what Charlie just said, I think the two things that we see most when we talk to waste contractors is, one is the provision of accurate data. We have something at BRE called Smart Waste, which collects waste data, and then in turn we can use some of that data to actually develop some of our LCA databases. And then the other thing, I guess, is what Charlie just said, which is this idea that waste contractors will move more towards a space of being a material provider. I think there is a lot of policy and legislation that still needs to shift for that to happen. But I think as an idea, that's where we want to head. That's sort of a very ideal case scenario.
Brilliant, thank you. We are just a couple of minutes away from time. So just a couple of things. So Andrew mentioned this earlier. I also dropped the link into the chat. We do have this on our website, the Embodied Carbon Playbook for House Builders. Lots of great information in there. So please do go and check that out if that's of interest. And one more thing from me, we also have a Winter Sustainability Summit coming up on December the 5th. This is a 2-hour virtual event with loads of big names. And it's going to be a really great event. We're expecting lots of great content to be shared. So please do go ahead and join us for that. I'll drop the link in the chat as well for that. And then finally, thank you. We've covered a lot of content here today, hopefully answered some of your questions. Do feel free to stay in touch with our speakers if you want to carry on the conversation. And once again, thank you to the three of you as well for taking the time and sharing your insight from three very different perspectives. Thank you very much, and see you again soon.
Thanks, Laura. Thanks for organising.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, great to be a part of it. Thanks, Bill.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.